Let's say we have a cupboard and we want to move it around. So to move it around, let's say we push the cupboard with our hands extended straight along the direction in which we want to move it. Now the cupboard will move some distance. Now, if the hands are not along the direction of hands, or the push is not along the direction of movement, that means it is at some angle, either up, down, or sideways. So that means it is at an angle from the direction in which we want to move it. Then the distance covered will be less. Greater the angle, the lesser the movement. So when we basically do a push, we are applying a force on the cupboard. So force requires both. What are they? The amount of force, amount, or more properly the magnitude, and it also requires a proper direction. So force is something where we need to look at both magnitude and direction. So such a quantity is called a vector, of course, which means there are some things, some quantities which would not require direction. So quantities with only magnitude are called scalars. For example, length, breadth, area, and so on. Other vector quantities, some of the other are velocity, acceleration, and so on. So there are some quantities which are vector, some are scalars. Now a vector is represented using directed line segment. So we might have a vector like this. It will have an initial point and a final point. We can give a single letter name to this. So here the length of the line segment represents the magnitude, and the direction is usually in terms of angles. Now when we are just writing it without this graphical representation, we can just write it as AB, or we can write it as A. Now the magnitude, if we are just interested in the magnitude part of the vector, then we write it as AB within vertical bars, or A within vertical bars. Magnitude is also called length or modulus. So, but preferably you use either magnitude or modulus. If the magnitude of a vector is 1, it is called a unit vector. A unit vector in the direction of a given vector is denoted by, that means only the direction part of a vector can be written like this, A cap. Now if the magnitude is 0, then it is called a zero vector or a null vector. Its direction is undefined. Two vectors are equal vectors if they have same magnitude and same direction. So let's say we have a vector like this, another vector like this, and another vector like this. Okay, let's say this is A, this is B, this is C, right? So A is equal to B. So vector A is equal to vector B. We can also say magnitude of vector A is equal to magnitude of vector B, and let's say magnitude of vector C. And here we can say vector A is not equal to vector C. Like vectors are those that have same direction, and unlike if they have opposite directions. A vector equal in magnitude but opposite in direction is called a negative vector. For example, in the above set of vectors ABC, we can say vector A is equal to minus of C, vector C. Or we can say C is, either will be correct. Collinear vectors, collinear vector have, or vectors have same directions irrespective of magnitude. Coplanar vectors lie on the same plane. Okay. Co-initial vectors have the same initial point. Vectors can be made co-initial by moving them around without changing their directions. A vector whose initial point can be chosen at any point is called a free vector, where the choice for initial point is restricted. It is called a localized vector. As mentioned before, given two vectors, we can make them co-initial by moving them around. So say for example, we have something like this. Now what we can do is we can catch hold of this and move it around. Remember, we can't change the direction, and make them co-initial. So naturally, when you do that, you will end up with an angle between the two vectors. So two vectors will have an angle between them and is always positive and between 0 and pi. Remember, we are not interested in the positive or negativity of the angle. We are just interested whether it is here, 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 right? What does a vector make an angle with respect to another vector? If the angle theta, let's say, is equal to 0, then vectors are parallel or collinear. That means they lie on each other. If theta is equal to pi by 2 or 90 degree, vectors are called orthogonal vectors. Yes. So orthogonal vectors, collinear vectors, angle between these vectors, localized vector, free vector, co-initial vectors, coplanar vectors, equal vectors, negative vectors, like vectors, unlike vectors, equal vectors, magnitude, unit vector, and how they are represented, and most importantly, what are vectors and scalars. These are the terms you need to be very comfortable with. So that's it as far as introduction to vectors is concerned. Bye for now.